The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome everybody listening. I think we'll wait 30 seconds more to allow a few more people to get on board. We'll start shortly. Okay. All right. Warm welcome to everybody listening to this webinar, which is, the theme is stopping attacks before they stop you. This is a webinar from out of Stockholm, Sweden, and we do a lot of webinars in Swedish. This one will not be a webinar in Swedish. We have attendees from Sweden and some of the other Scandinavian countries, so it will be in English. Also, I have a colleague with me, so if you would care to switch slides, please. Thank you. Yeah, about myself, my name is Timo Sepp. I am the business manager of the Managed Detection and Response Service at F-Secure for Scandinavia. I have a background of about 20 years in IT infrastructure and cybersecurity services. I joined F-Secure earlier this year. And, today we're going to discuss around a couple of themes when it comes to attacks and what makes detecting and doing something about attacks so difficult. And joining me today, I have my dear colleague, Tony, from our London office. Tony, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, a very good morning, everyone, and welcome to you from very sunny United Kingdom. Now, let me tell you, this is not typical weather that you might expect in the UK, but we're really blessed to be entering spring. Yes, as Timo said, my name is Tony Smith, and I've been working with F-Secure over the last 4 years, predominantly in our managed services division. But what I get to do is I get to spend a lot of time in my role with our customers on events just like this one, and sharing thoughts, as I've done in roundtable discussions in the last 3 or 4 weeks in particular, around these sorts of topics. And so today we're hoping to bring some light into this world where you as security professionals typically, or IT professionals certainly, will be faced with a number of challenges in your day-to-day operations. So a little bit about my background. You might be able to tell from my accent that I'm not a British native. I was born and grew up in South Africa, where I spent a lot of my sort of young adult life. I spent some time in the military and then moved into corporate commercial roles. I've spent the last 22 years of my life here in the UK, really loving the weather, as you will imagine, but really investing my time and my energy into technology-led environments. And the last 4 years in cybersecurity has just been, it's been the most fun I've ever had in my career. So we're hoping that you'll enjoy the time with us today. Please remember, just some housekeeping, that we have a chat function. We have the fantastic Isabel Lindgren, who's sitting in the background. In fact, she's sitting next to Timo, and she'll be monitoring the chat. And at some point, we'll be able to come to questions that you also have. We will have a couple of polls during the course of this session as well, just to kind of keep it interactive. But overall, we're hoping to share some of our insight with you today. So thank you, and back to you, Timo.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Tony. And good that you mentioned the polls. I mean, the whole thought about having a webinar like this is that we do have it a little bit interactive, and that it's not just a monologue. We'd love to hear your thoughts. As being very passionate about cybersecurity, I think something that a lot of customers ask me is that, or our team, is that how do you find the right balance of investment between prevention, protection, detection, and response, and perhaps recovery as well. You know, if compromise is inevitable, it's going to happen anyway. What is the value of deterrence? Tony,
right.
can you elaborate on that?
You've got straight in with some really, really meaty questions. Let's look first at the right balance across the we call it the security continuum, PPDR. And in fact, I think we've got a picture that we can share with the attendees today that will really kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So on the screen, you'll see there's the security continuum. As I said, it typically consists of an acronym for predict, prevent, detect, respond, and recover, as you can see on the screen. So PPDRR. And your question, Timo, is really about the investment. Where's the balance of investment across these things? Well, I'm going to share with you some of my experience and from the experience of others that I've gained over the last sort of few years. And it tells me this. It tells me that traditionally, and we're talking about in the last 10, 15 years or so in particular, we've seen a lot of investment, a lot of budget being allocated to preventative technologies. All right, can we stop the army at the gates? Can we stop the criminals before they enter our environments? And I say it's a traditional method because I think the landscape certainly is changing. Now, we'll talk about that change in just a moment. But all of the feedback I'm getting, whether it's from some of my existing customers, but also from organizations that I've only recently met, there's still this tendency to throw a lot of budget at prevent kind of technologies and services and solutions. Prediction, there's certainly some work that goes in there. Even organizations like ourselves, we do a lot of consultancy and research and so on. So there's certain services that you can avail yourself of in the prediction space. But predict and prevent certainly get the lion's share of the budget. Now this is true as well. We've seen a shift over the last 5 or 6 years or so. We've seen a shift into detection and response in particular, but we're not the only ones. All right, there are more than 3,000 security companies around the world, cybersecurity companies, and F-Secure is one of them. We have a track record. You know, we could go into a long list of things that we've accomplished in this space, but actually, what we're seeing is that in general, there's this shift towards detection and response. And Gartner, the well-known industry analysts, they picked up this same trend. In fact, in 2 of their reports that they've written about MDR, which of course we can make available to you on request, they have MDR market guides. And these guides are written by Gartner in order to inform the security community about this emerging trend, if you will. I mean, it's been around for a little while now, but it's still in their minds very much an emerging trend of detection and response. And in these 2 market guides, one in 2019 and the other one in September last year, 2020, they spoke about the shift. And the 2020 report said that by 2025, 50% of organizations will have invested in some sort of managed detection and response service. So there's certainly a shift. A managed detection and response really is designed it answers the question, what happens next? All right. So let's quickly kind of set the scene. You mentioned it as well, Timo. You said, but if we start from a position that compromise is inevitable, in fact, the words that someone said to me last week in a similar forum, in a round table kind of forum, said, actually, I start with a position of when I'm going to be compromised, not if. All right. So it's not a question really of if, certainly in their mind and certainly in the minds of the customers that we work with. It's not a question of if you'll suffer a breach. It's merely a matter of time. And so even with our own consultancy experience, we've been able to evade preventative technologies, preventative mechanisms, preventative security in order to get access into custom environments. You know, those that have invited us to test them. So we know that you can get through the barriers. It's a bit like, in fact, Isabel, I think we've got another picture that it kind of illustrates this point about deterrence. We start from the position of compromise being inevitable, and it is a lot like a very determined burglar. even with the best defenses, and I should know, you know, Africa's got some particular challenges around these sorts of events. Even with the best deterrents, even with the highest walls and the sophisticated electric fencing, a determined burglar will find a way to break through that barrier. All right. But what we want to do effectively is we want to try and make it as difficult as possible. All right. We want to put as many challenges in the way of our organizational security in order to deter the attackers. One commentator that I spoke to last week said to me, actually, the whole goal in making it as difficult as possible, what was the point he was trying to make? He was effectively trying to illustrate that an attacker will very often and more likely lose interest if they find too many barriers in the way, and they'll go, okay, listen, there's got to be an easier target, and they will subsequently move somewhere else. So the whole goal is to make it more difficult. In fact, like the next picture that we've got, we want to create a whole lot more obstacles for attackers to have to go through, and sometimes even our users would say, you know, our own organizational users would say something like, yeah, but this is too difficult. I've got to enter 3 passwords before I get access to our systems every day. And I think what we need to do is try and strike the right balance between having security as an enabler, which allows us to continue to safely conduct our business, rather than simply putting up a whole lot of blockers for our own people. And of course, the balance then becomes the one with efficiency as well. So a little like this picture, you know, have multiple locks on the door, or make it like an assault course for an attacker. But that's where the power of deterrence really kind of shows itself. I hope that's kind of answered that first set of questions. It was a really meaty one to start with. So thanks for that.
Yeah, so thank you, Tony. So there is value in deterrence, definitely.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I suppose it's not an easy question to answer, right? Finding the right balance of investment. But yeah, there's definitely a shift in the market. I completely agree, towards the detection and response side. So, Tony, if we're seeking to limit the impact of a breach, what are the fundamental things to do?
Right. So again, you know, we get kind of straight to the meat of today's topic, really. We could look at a number of key areas, but I think these certainly these 4 areas stand out to me. In talking with our incident response team, this is the kind of stuff that they are really quite, you know, they get quite passionate about. You know, don't just pull the plug on a network. If you think someone's on the inside, don't just pull the plug. There might be some forensic analysis you can do before they get to the money or the data or whatever it is they're trying to steal. So rule number 1, just don't panic. And of course, don't panic is an easy thing to say when you're in the midst of an event or in the midst of the fire, so to speak. But we found this useful little image, this cyber crisis memory aid, which also uses the words "don't panic" in it. I won't read through all of them for our guests this morning, but I would say this, you know, to pay some attention to the fact that at some point, you know, we need to retain, you know, objectivity and access to your systems. You know, don't be distracted by the things that are going around you. Try and focus in on the facts of, you know, what is happening in this environment right now. You know, triple check the facts, for example. So there are a number of top tips on that little memory aid. Of course, it's quite humorous that it should have a pair of scissors around the edge, because it's the kind of thing you could cut out and keep in your pocket. But number 1, just don't panic. There are people that can help you, and I think that's kind of really what you need to keep in mind. Number 2, the whole goal here is to try and get as much visibility as possible. Now, you might find, well, if I'm trying to get as much visibility as possible, what does that look like? An accomplished incident response team will have access to tools and methods in order to be able to see into your environment. If, on the other hand, you're a managed services customer, for example, a managed services customer of ours, we will already have had that visibility, and the chances of limiting an impact, in fact, would be significantly lower, or sorry, the chances of limiting the impact will be higher. In other words, the impact itself will be much lower because we already have visibility and we're able to thwart those attacks. We can get in the way. But if you don't have those sorts of detection and response services in place, getting visibility is the next most important step. Number 3, get qualified help. All right, I think this is something that I would say is common in everyday life. I'm a commercial professional. You know, I do a lot of presenting and speaking and meeting and negotiating, and that's all great, but I'm not a car mechanic. And so when my car breaks down, I take it to a professional. All right, it's the same thing. I have recently had some electrical needs at my house. I need a new socket, electrical socket for an outside plug point. I called a professional. I called an electrician. So it's absolutely right, and it's the same sort of motivation that I would encourage everybody to get qualified help. There are a number of excellent incident response teams available to you in the market today, much like the one that we provided F-Secure as well. You know, guys and girls who've got experience and real skill in dealing with the kinds of crises that happen during the course of a breach. And then number 4, I would say the ability to take early action. Now, of course, if you get the right help, and that help has the right visibility, it gives them a chance, a fighting chance to take early action. And of course, it's one of the things, even when we talk about our managed detection and response service, we talk about the ability to bring traditional response up the kill chain. In other words, we can see stuff much earlier before the impact is done. So, these, I would say, these are your 4 kind of fundamentals, if you will. The don't panic acronym, which is broken down there for people to see. And please don't worry. You know, if you've attended this webinar today, if you'd like just a copy of these some of these pictures and some of these slides that we're using, please just make a request in the chat, and we'd be able to get them back to you. I can see that this slide in particular would probably be just a useful guide. I mean, many of you will be aware of these kind of needs and priorities already. So yeah, don't panic. Get early visibility. Get qualified help, because that gives us the ability, or gives you, in fact, the ability to take action as early as possible.
Thanks, Tony. So no need to screenshot and print and cut out whatever is in the presentation.
Yeah, no, we can make them available. That's no problem.
Of course. Hey, I'm thinking also about having been involved in a lot of projects involving technology. I mean, will the emergence of new technologies such as machine learning and AI, will that be a help, or will it actually make it harder for us to stop attacks?
Yeah, look, really, I'm probably going to say this to every question you ask me today. That's a really good question. Look, it's a very popular question. In fact, one that I speak to a lot of businesses about all the time. You know, there is this focus, perhaps even hype. There's a lot of hype around artificial intelligence. It's the next, savior of our world. And I'm going to be really honest with you. At F-Secure, we are doing a whole lot of research into artificial intelligence. In fact, our artificial intelligence lab is one of the leading authorities on the uses and the development of AI, and in particular in the security industry. We're trying to use it for good, but there's no doubting the fact that even sophisticated attackers, you don't even have to be that sophisticated now. You can buy ransomware as a service online. You can buy malware as a service online somewhere in the darkened corners of the internet. And so there's no secret that attackers are using this kind of technology to make things easier for them. What we're seeing, some trends are, clearly we've got our own development in those environments, in AI and machine learning, and we utilize those sorts of developments, with those sorts of advances in technology to our benefit as well. Even in our managed service, where it's very people-led, it's very people-centric, so it's about people, process, and technology. We have some of the really most skilled individuals, but of course we also use some artificial intelligence, some elements of it, but we use machine learning in our services too. But let's look at why. So you've got to think about what is the benefit that this technology really brings to us, and therefore to our audience, to to our customer base, technology is about efficiency, right? So technology is about making things easier. So we use, for example, some technology for detection. There's some very good detection technologies out there. We've developed our own in-house. And what it does is effectively it allows us to aggregate and collect a whole lot of telemetry, right? So telemetry from environments, from PCs, servers, laptops, desktops, you name it. It'll bring those data sources into our back-end systems. Then, of course, we use some technology there too, and that's about trying to sift out using some smart detection rules, for example, and some machine learning capability, particularly when we look at things like memory scanning, where we're particularly strong. A lot of attacks are kind of running from memory, so that they don't land themselves on a device's hard drive anymore. They're able to kind of run in the wild, as it were. So those sorts of things are where technology really aids us, and it just makes it adds to the efficiency of getting through what is actually a lot of data and a lot of noise, getting down to the attacker behaviors that we're looking to spot and obviously to identify. And the quicker we can identify those attacker behaviors, the better our people then can go through the process of investigating and ensuring that we've got the ability to deal with anything that looks or that is confirmed to be malicious. Now, remember, a lot of things are going to look malicious or suspicious, but they might not necessarily be. You know, we've got admins in our environments who have the keys to the kingdom, right? Our system admins will very often back themselves when they see a new piece of software on the internet and they want to download it and, oh, let me try this out. And of course, it might just be one instance or two instances of, I don't know, a piece of software that just hadn't been used in that environment before. And of course, that'll raise a flag and say, oh, are these users allowed to be using that piece of software? And so it causes an investigation, and we would work to rule it in or out as a false positive, of course. But look, technology is about efficiency. We use it. Attackers are using it too. So the question is, who's going to win the fight? And let me encourage everybody on the call today, everybody who's listening, is the fact is we will win this fight. All right, not because just because it can be won or because we need to. No, but we have to. We have to get one step ahead of the attackers at every point. And sometimes in this race, sometimes an attacker with a sophisticated capability will get ahead of the defenders, and then the defenders will catch up because of the kind of work we're doing in research, for example, to kind of regain some of that control. No, listen, I think the number one kind of, I could summarize the answer. Technology is about efficiency, and we all use it day to day.
Yeah, good one. All right. So kind of linked to the question about technology is one of the most profound shifts in technology over the last, say, 10 years has been moving to the cloud. And we actually have a question for the audience about, how far have you gotten with your move to the cloud or the shift to the cloud? I mean, we certainly see a lot of hybrid environments in our work.
Yeah. I just, I guess while the poll is up, we'll give the audience just a moment or two to quickly respond to that.
Yes.
It's a really, really interesting question. Are we seeing some responses there?
Yes, a few responses are coming in.
Good.
There's a couple more.
Super. I'm interested to see what the trend is among those on the webcast today. We'll just give it 10 more seconds.
So we can see that roughly 20% have nothing in the cloud, according to our poll here. About 30% have less than 50%, and there is about 50% at more than 50%.
Okay.
Which kind of validates the idea that well, a lot of our customers are indeed handling hybrid environments in the cloud, or
Yeah, absolutely
partly
right.
on-premise and partly in the cloud. But Tony, how does the shift to cloud shift our thinking, sort of, in the security business? How can companies manage security across all of these environments? Not only that they're hybrid, but also perhaps multiple clouds.
Really interesting topic. Of course, it's really topical across industry now. You know, where do we go with cloud? And look, if I'm really transparent with everybody, I think probably 8 or 10 years ago, you find people were very skeptical about the cloud, and they were asking questions like, "Oh, I'm not sure. Is it secure enough for me to have my my devices, my services, my software, etc. Somewhere else where I can't see it or own it or control it?" So people were quite skeptical. And then about 5 years ago, well, about 6 years ago, there was this massive shift. It didn't become a question of if I should go to the cloud. It's more like, how do I secure my journey to the cloud? So it became more intentional. It was much more intent. And I think today the same is true. As we saw with that poll, and it's always interesting to ask the audience some questions around this kind of stuff. But as we saw with that poll, across all of the sectors that we cover in our customer base, the same metrics are true. All right, you've got these, I don't want to call them extremes, but you've got this range, the spectrum of cloud adoption. And some are very cloud first, as is depicted on the screen by the cloud. Some are very cloud first, and some are quite cloud averse. And now it's not because, and actually we've noticed this in some particular sectors, there's a real extreme kind of shift. In one sector, in particular in the legal sector, we know that there are the two extremes. There's cloud first in some of our legal customers, and then there's, I'm not really sure about this cloud thing at all for some of our other legal customers. And we're trying to work out why it is there's such a big range. There are, of course, hybrid networks. As we've just seen in that poll, you know, you had, I think, 30%, I think you said was less than 50, and 50% was more than 50. So certainly there's some hybrid environments. Of course, multiple cloud deployments are also popular. You don't want to put all your eggs necessarily in one basket. It's a common phrase. But I think, look, the question you asked is about how it shifts for us in the security community. And so there are a couple of key things to note. Number one, talking with our incident response team, there's no question whatsoever the issues that they find when they're dealing with incidents, breach incidents at customers who, for example, might not have had our managed service, but they come in through the incident response channel. What they're finding is that misconfiguration is still kind of the largest source of the challenges that they face. All right. We're developing some services that you're going to be able to deploy into cloud environments to find misconfigurations. We're going to be able to find some of the things that will make it stronger. We're going to be able to find some of the services. You know, if we think about multi-factor authentication, for example, it's very popular for cloud services in particular. I think it should be popular for all services, frankly, because, you know, we're in an environment where passwords can be cracked, and my PIN numbers, you know, if it's a 4 or 6-digit PIN number, it's a bit of maths, and you can get there in the end. I think the fact is, MFA, multi-factor authentication, is a necessity in our environments today. What we've found, and this is absolutely true, I experienced this maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, multi-factor authentication gets configured in the organization. We send all the details to the users and say, oh, please, you need to click this to configure your multi-factor authentication, but the users never set it up. So IT teams go, yeah, we've configured multi-factor authentication, and they champion it in their organization, and they say, yeah, we've done this. We've reached a new status of security. But in actual fact, the users have been so lazy that they haven't completed the configuration, haven't completed the setup of it. And so that sort of discipline is certainly starting to change. We're seeing a real shift in that space. So that's probably shift number one. Multi-factor authentication is becoming more prevalent. People are adopting it appropriately. They're setting it up for their teams, but they're also ensuring that the users complete the configuration. I mean, we've come across cases where company said that we'd set it up, but of course the user is blissfully unaware that their account has already been compromised because someone was able to set up, an attacker was able to set up their multi-factor authentication to authenticate back to an attacker's device. So misconfiguration, massive problem. It's a big challenge. It's one that we, as I say, hopefully are going to be able to help organizations resolve towards the end of the year. But there are other things you can do in the cloud as well. If we think about detection and response in the cloud today, it isn't a myth. It's not as difficult for infrastructure as you might think, because actually if you're running infrastructure as a service providers like us would treat infrastructure simply as another endpoint. So you could load our detection and response agent, for example, into that environment. If it's platform as a service, slightly more tricky, and that's where we're looking to develop some services around kind of misconfiguration checks and can we make sure that this is strengthened as much as possible. And then finally, for software as a service, F-Secure is, we're a leading light in researching and developing a number of services that would secure the most common software as a service platform. So, for example, cloud protection for Salesforce is available today. Cloud protection for Microsoft 365 or Microsoft 365 is available today. And so into other cloud environments, you'll see that expansion over time. We've got a lot of good work going on with Microsoft and the Azure cloud platforms. We've also got a lot of development, in fact, some enhanced and advanced development in AWS as well. But of course, there are other cloud providers. Google has its own cloud environment, Google Cloud. And then there are private providers, people like GTT and GTT was formerly Interroute. They're a private corporate cloud provider, and they provide it to organizations as well on the back of their extensive network. So yeah, there's all sorts of development going on. There is a massive shift. We have the spectrum of cloud adoption. Not everyone is in the same boat, but of course, we're trying to ensure that organizations can have a secure cloud experience as well. Because after all, ask the question, why do they move to the cloud? Well, they're looking for operational efficiency. You don't have to buy 10 anymore and look after it and maintain it. You get someone else to do that, and you're just paying for consumption, basically. But of course, we live in a consumption-dominated world now. Everything's by subscription. I do understand, and this will make all the Swedes on the call very happy. I understand that even in the UK now, there's something called Volvo Care or Volvo, but it's just car subscription. I don't even have to buy the car anymore. I can simply hire the car on a subscription basis, and they take care of all the maintenance and everything. So a very subscription-led world, and I think that's kind of the shift we're seeing. Subscription services, a consumption of services, but also subscriptions for protection and the kind of services that we provide.
And it's probably wouldn't you agree, the speed of deploying new infrastructure? I mean, the DevOps thinking, the whole, we can release something within minutes instead of weeks. That has kind of driven up all these, and I think all the things you're pointing out, the misconfigurations, and potentially then losing your credentials. Somebody using your cloud infrastructure. I mean, it kind of comes hand in hand. But I'm so happy to hear that you pointed at some of the things you can do, because that's really the theme of the call. So how do we stop these attacks before they actually stop us? Hey, and for those of you listening who are real security professionals, the next question is perhaps obvious for you. For some of you, perhaps not. But is compliance a good enough way to get a good night's sleep? What do you think?
Well, listen, I'd love it. Actually, we should have probably had another poll question, Timo, to say how many people get a good night's sleep off the back of a checklist. Look, compliance is necessary. We live in a world where there are macro changes in environments now. Some of those what do we call them? Global megatrends is what we refer to them as. Some real shifts. One is that there's geopolitical change everywhere, of course. Then the second one is there's more regulation now than ever. And of course, in a regulated environment, compliance becomes really important. Now, I have regular conversations, and this is a tag phrase that I use in the conversations I'm having with some of our customers and even with prospects, you know, people who are looking at our service and considering why a managed service might be the answer for them. This is the phrase I use. I can defend you against an attacker, but I have some trouble defending you against an auditor. Now, of course, it's a bit of a joke phrase, but actually there's a lot of truth behind the fact that compliance is good because it allows us to have a framework for certain things that need to be in place. And of course, we would encourage that for every organization. But for me, and certainly for the people I talk to, compliance is not the way to get a good night's sleep. What you need to do is know that you have the ability to take certain actions. All right, compliance certainly will make sure that you've got some things in place, but it doesn't take the action for you. And so from that perspective, I would say compliance isn't really the sleeping pill. I think if you have access to the right kind of support, you know, earlier we talked about, look, don't panic, get visibility, ask for appropriate, you know, and skilled and professional help. I think if you've got the right professional help, I think you'll sleep much better than if you just check the box. It says, oh yeah, I've got an ISO 27001 certification. Trust me, your ISO certification's probably not going to save you in the event of a breach. But having access to the right people might do a much better job, of course. So look, I think, as I say, compliance is important, but I think there's a shift in the way that we focus our minds on compliance and security and business enablement. You know, security as an enabler, I think, just has a slightly different focus. The two things, of course, work together. But I would say to anybody on this webcast today, you know, if you're simply looking down a checklist and say, yeah, I've got antivirus and I've got a firewall and I've got, you know, ISO policies and I've got an incident response retainer, I think what you need to do is try and back up the compliance with the assurance of knowing that you've got access to the right sorts of skills, either in-house, which is more rare now than you think, or outsource them, which of course is where organizations like us obviously come into play. You know, we have specialist resource. You can access it almost at the touch of a button. So those sorts of things, those are shifts. But I would say add to compliance. Don't rely solely on it. That would be my advice.
Right. Lovely. Thanks. Here we have a question actually from the audience.
Go on.
Which we love, of course. And it's related to supply chain attacks. So basically, the Solorigate and exchange hacks are you know, supply chain threats. And what can we do to mitigate that kind of threats? I mean, we purchase services from somebody, and those services are actually compromised. Do you have a good
really
answer?
Well, look, I'm hoping I'm going to be able to give a good answer to this one. I've got some experience in seeing supply chain attacks myself, and so I guess I've got a bit of context there. Look, these ones with Exchange and Solorigate and so on, there's a lot of good blogs that have been written. In fact, I would invite us, let's make a note of this one, Timo. We've got a couple of blogs. I think it was a research paper we wrote recently about the MS Exchange attack and the vulnerability, should I say, that was exploited. And we'll send it to all delegates. There's some really interesting stuff that our researchers have pulled out of those events. But I think there's some common threads in supply chain attacks. And your question and the question from the audience there was like, how do we mitigate the risk that a supply chain attack can have? I would say this: number one, don't be shy to ask your suppliers don't be scared to set a certain standard. It doesn't mean that you would require them to have certain security services themselves, but you should be asking the question: how are they securing their environments? I know that for us, we're a security provider. Yet from some of our customers, I get a questionnaire every year. Hey, can you tell me, what have you done about this? What kind of policies have you got in place for that? What's the procedure if XYZ should unfold? So we've got a whole lot of things that we provide our own customers as assurance to say, well, the good news is that not only are we defending you and protecting you, but also we're protecting ourselves from being a supply chain risk to you. And so I think that would be the first kind of top tip. You know, don't be scared to engage with your suppliers. Make sure you're aware of who your supply chain is, what kind of services that they're providing. And I'll give an example. So about 3 years ago now, I was involved in. I was kind of on the edges of an investigation that was happening in the UK. The timing of this investigation was really quite interesting because it was just after a bit of a political incident between the UK and Russia, for example. And the timing of this incident, as we were looking into it, we were investigating an organization that had been targeted, right? We were called into as an investigator, an incident response team, to investigate an incident at a certain organization. They were in the, I can't say which sector it was because it would be sort of fairly obvious, but it was in critical national infrastructure, all right? If you think for any country, there's critical national infrastructure, and when those things come under attack, they call in the heavy artillery to come and work out what's going on, all right? So we were called in to investigate this organization. What we found was that there was no attack stream or vector or entry point from the outside. So we thought, well, okay, look, there's a couple of other things that could have happened. We could have had an insider threat. Someone's been bought or bribed, or maybe some credentials were stolen, but they look like a user, right? But actually, even that didn't turn out to be true. We found that there were some breadcrumbs leading to one of their suppliers. So we followed the breadcrumbs through to that supplier organization. We managed to get enough data there to ascertain that even though the attack came and originated from their environment into this customer who'd engaged our services, actually they weren't the entry point either. There were no external routes into that organization. And this was 3 years ago, by the way, because the next part of the story becomes really, really interesting when you talk, when you will link it up to another recent global hack that we saw. There was a third company. In other words, there was a weaker link in the chain, in the supply chain. And this is often what attackers will do. They will look at kind of where their targets are and say, well, I can't get in there. Let me see if I can get in somewhere else. Now, typically, if you get in somewhere else, you can get to your target, all right? And that's the capability that our own teams are able to demonstrate. But certainly the attackers involved here, some are organized crime groups who are really motivated by money, and others are nation states, mostly, you know, they're motivated by political power and interference and destabilization and so on. Some nation states, by the way, also motivated by money. But in this case, that didn't seem to be the motive. But you can do that through a kind of a two-step approach. But actually, there was a three-step approach here. So we suspect that they'd simply attacked the weakest part of the chain. And the weakest part of the chain happened to be a small networking company. It was an organization only had about 10 or 12 employees, and obviously, therefore, not the budgets to kind of secure their environment in the way that big organizations might. But what they found is they had infiltrated this organization, and guess, this is where it links to another recent case that you would have heard about. SolarWinds is a network management platform. Right? I used it extensively when I was in the telecoms industry. SolarWinds is a platform which exists to allow you to manage network switches, routers, manage networks and so on. And this third company, we called it Company C, because you had Company A was the target, Company B was the middleman, and Company C was this entry point for the attackers. They were a really small organization. You know, a hack like this would have crippled them. But they were using the SolarWinds platform to serve their customers' needs. And of course, they served Company B. And Company B allowed them to manage their networks and so on. But of course, when the attacker was able to use the SolarWinds platform as an entry point onto the Company B network, that's where the supply chain attack obviously became real. At some point, we don't know whether it was by luck or judgment, but this sophisticated attacker who we were able to identify in the end, attribution is always quite difficult in this world that we live in, and then sometimes can be quite dangerous as well to kind of point the finger, oh, it's you, it's you, it's you. But we were able to attribute the attack, but what we found is that whether by luck or judgment, they ended up going through Company B and getting to where the big fish was. Company A was kind of at the top of the supply chain. So yeah, just an interesting case study around a supply chain attack and some of the dangers that exist. But I think what is absolutely true, I'll draw the circle now to my advice, which is, hey, have a chat with your suppliers, find out what they're doing for their security. Get confidence from them. Yes, you're confident in the services they provide you, but you also need to be confident in how they get to provide those services. So don't be scared to ask the question. That would be my advice.
Right. Thanks. Good answer and an interesting case story. Which kind of leads me to the last point I'd like to make. Did we have another poll for this one?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. So basically about finding and having the right people inside your organization or somebody to help you. Poll is about, so is it hard to find and retain cybersecurity specialists? Let's give it a few.
Yeah, well, let's give our audience just a minute or so to respond to that. I'd be interested to see the feedback here as well. Certainly, we've got some experience in this field, so I'll share some insight as we draw towards the close. Oh, and while the audience is just filling out the poll, don't forget you've still got the opportunity to ask more questions. This is a live webinar, so let's see if we can get some of your questions in there as well.
Right.
But, how are we doing on the responses?
Well, it seems we are kicking in open doors. Actually, 100% are saying that cybersecurity specialists, it is difficult to find them, and of course also to keep them.
Okay.
So
hey, look,
yeah, how do you manage to attract them specialists?
I was going to say, actually, first of all, I'm not surprised by the responses at all. In 2017, an organization, independent analyst called Frost & Sullivan, they did a report in 2017 saying, and these were the words they used, there is a problematic shortage of cyber talent. And of course, what that does, just in one sentence, it tells us that there's a real challenge in this area. I do a lot of talks. I move around to high schools as well. I work obviously with our customers, but when I'm outside of work, I take some time going into schools and I say, hey man, cybersecurity is such an interesting place to work. Not just because it's F-secure, but actually because the industry itself is really, it's bustling with new research, and it moves so fast. I think there's the kind of engagement and career prospects for young folk, young men and women who are looking for something really engaging line of work. Now, look, that's just as an aside. Number one, I'm not surprised by the poll results because we see it as well. As a security specialist, I think we have the edge, frankly, in the market. We have some very good programs to bring on, new graduates, for example. We have intern programs. We do a lot of really exciting stuff that's very engaging in the field that we work. But I think it's the quality of the work that we do that allows us to have that edge. We're doing kind of industry-leading research on trying to break through some barriers. We're trying to deconstruct some attack techniques. We're looking to, we enter the hacking competitions every year. There's a prominent one. I think we just had the 2021 edition of Pwn to Own. I don't know if it was in Tokyo or Vancouver, but I think they have 2 a year, and it kind of alternates between location. But we enter competitions like that to enter our research and our ability to deliver an exploit effectively under stress in a competition environment. And of course, it drives our research. So you've asked how we tackle that problem. I think obviously early engagement with our target audience is really good. We speak, as I say, we speak in schools and so on, but we also do a lot of good work with universities. We have a good, it's like partnership programs, effectively, with some of the leading universities where there's some really top talent that we can identify. So those are some of the things we do. But of course, working patterns are important. If I think about my managed detection and response teams, I have a follow the sun model around the world, and none of our people have to work a night shift. That's really important to trying to run a 24/7 operation and retaining them. One of the other things we do, which I think the audience will find really, really interesting, because even in my line of work, I wouldn't necessarily have this sort of scope myself, but in our technical disciplines, we give all of our technical consultants and our detection and response team members up to 50% of their time just to research. All right, so they'll find something that's interesting in their line of work, and they'll go, oh, there's a new attack technique that we've discovered, either from a blog or a Twitter feed or something. A lot of intel now is available at our fingertips. But they'll pick up a little thread and they'll go and do a whole lot of research as part of their working time into that attacker trend and say, well, if that's what the attack is capable of, how might we act in order to defend against it? And so a lot of that research time, it's really stimulating work. It's interesting and it's exciting. It keeps everyone on their toes. But of course, they have the ability to take that research work and bring it back and develop a deliverable as part of their work. So they can say, oh, no, I did this research. This is what I found. And these are the things that I think we can do to stop these attackers. And it might turn into, for example, a new detection rule, which looks for certain attacker behaviors. I think the big myth is that people say, for example, we call our detection and response team the threat hunters. And people think that threat hunting is sitting looking at a screen watching alerts. Please, if you have been led to that myth, then you've been misled. Let me tell you that threat hunting, done in its purest form, is the research. It's not alert spotting, right? SOC analysts, a lot of them will be junior kind of skills. Some of them will be just like new graduates, but they'll come into corporate environments just like those in our audience. And they will just be told, hey, just look for these red flags. When you see a red flag, you just tell us. And when you see a red, and maybe after they've been there a year or 2 years, they might be able to do something about the red flags themselves. They would have learned what to do in those instances. But I think that's the challenge. A lot of our threat hunters have been in our business for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. They're all offensively trained. They're hackers. So they understand the attacker mindset. Whereas we find that in other SOC environments, and I guess this is kind of the balance between our managed service and some other SOC environments, they just grab, whatever people will apply for the job, and they just put them in a seat and say, look at alerts. And so I think what we've got to do is create an environment across cybersecurity, by the way, and it's not just in security specialists like us, but across cybersecurity teams, even of those like the organizations we've got with us today. Find ways to develop that talent, find ways to take them up a level, because when they get better, your organization wins. All right. And so from that perspective, I'd say, look at the development programs around that. That's certainly something we focus on. That's why our retention rates are so high. We don't often have, certainly in the technical divisions, we don't often have people, leaving for other jobs, because we provide a stimulating and rewarding and interesting and engaging environment for them to develop it. So, yeah, that's perhaps a long-winded answer to your question about how we can attract but also retain some of the brightest minds in the industry.
Well, there's no easy answer, obviously, when there's a real shortage of specialists. So I think it needed the long answer. But I think we need to start to wrap up, and I see that we don't have any more questions from the audience at this point.
Okay.
So yeah, really, perhaps concluding by stating a few of the takeaways that. Tony, you have guided us through, and big questions, long answers. But if we try to narrow it down a little bit, we do think that compromise is inevitable, and that the deterrence, so basically the investments in prevention and protection, are necessary. You do need to have that, but it is a wise idea to look at the detection and response capabilities that are out there today. Just because you will have at some point a breach. So and even like in your supply chain example, even smaller companies can be the kind of the pivot for somebody to do something bigger. And of course, for that small company that you talked about, networking company of 10, 12 employees, I mean, it will be a big crisis for them that the breadcrumbs led to them. So everybody needs to have an eye on this. So about the impact of a breach, what are the fundamental things to do? Well, I think you put it quite nicely. Don't panic. If you don't have the experts in-house, well, go and talk to the experts. And I think there it's always good, just having been in a few of these situations myself, to have some of this paperwork, some of this, looking for the right experts done beforehand, so that you don't do it in the middle of a breach. About new technologies, cloud. Well, I think we should embrace new technology. It does bring a lot of efficiencies. I think the speed that it allows us to move at, or companies, organizations all over, means also that the attackers also move at speed. So there needs to be a combination of technology, people, and probably process as well. So you know what is supposed to happen at each stage to be efficient when there is an incident. Compliance. Well, I think you put it quite nicely with the checklist. That's exactly what it is. It's of good use. It's something that we can use in the on the security side, but we need to do more, right? So it's basically the lowest bar to at least have some of the basic stuff in place. About supply chains, well, again, it comes down to, like you put it, Tony, about asking your suppliers and being quite upfront about it. That you need to know what they are doing to secure their systems that you are going to use. So I think that's the biggest one. And of course, still having that ability of finding threats where they occur. Last but not least, about security specialists. Well, again, it's not an easy thing to do, and certainly not all companies have the resources to find those specialists or build a SOC that works around the clock. There are lots of good alternatives in the market. We certainly provide that kind of services, and I really encourage you to take a look. And we'd be happy to have a conversation in private with you. So I think, am I forgetting something, Tony? Are there any other?
Look, I think something I don't think I touched on, but I just want to address it maybe in the last minute here is there are things that you can do to be prepared, all right? And organizations will have the opportunity to have some appropriate response policies in place, but don't leave them to collect dust on the shelf. Test them regularly, check, run some tabletop exercises just to say, how would we deal with an incident? How would we deal with the kind of response that might be required? So I think those sorts of things are important. Have some policies, be prepared to rehearse them. Proper practice will allow you. I think certainly something I learned when I was in the military, when you're practicing, like hitting the deck, you're right. As soon as you hear the first bullet fly, your training kicks in, and it allows you to do
muscle memory, right?
Yeah, exactly. A muscle memory. It's instinct, all right. And so you can train instinct, and I think that's what I would say to the audience. Have some plans in place. Prepare for them regularly. Practice them regularly. But also, talk to specialists. There's loads of organizations just like us who would welcome a conversation to say, how can I be better prepared in the event of an incident? Of course, one of the things we would, Timo and I would talk about would be our managed detection and response. This is the ability to see an attacker once they've broken through the fence, but we can still stop them before they get to the money. So that sort of context is something we'd, as I say, be available to chat with. But I think those are the only other things I wanted to add today, Timo. So thanks very much for hosting today, and for Isabel for some help in the background as well.
Yeah, thank you, Tony, and thank you, Isabel. So that's a wrap then. Thanks.
And thanks to our audience for attending today. We hope you found that session engaging. And if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Timo or to myself. We'd be delighted to have a phone conversation or a video call with you shortly. So thanks very much.
Thank you.